Welcome back, Embers, or if you're new here, welcome to the Campfire Crew. My name is Stone, my pronouns are they, them. This is my stuffed animal who's going to be joining us nameless today. And today I want to talk about 10 palettes I would buy from 10 brands that I love but have never bought anything from. So I decided to think of 10 brands that I've loved for a really long time, that I follow, their releases, that I'm always pining after things from, and that I just really think are cool brands. And imagine if I had a bigger collection, what from each brand would I get if I could only get one thing? And I'm not taking money into account. I'm imagining a world where somebody just gave me a bunch of money for these palettes. The first brand I picked was Nomad, and that's because this is the easiest one on the list, or one of the really easy ones on this list. I would absolutely, without a doubt, pick the Royal Europe palette. I think this is such a beautiful palette. I have wanted this palette for so long. I keep talking myself out of it because, like I said, small collection, don't wear a lot of eyeshadow. And so I keep talking myself out of it. But if somebody was like, here's money, buy a palette from this specific brand, without a doubt, it would be Royal Europe. Before this came out, I used to do the same thing. I'd be like, ooh, what would I get from this brand? Because I think it's really cool. And the ones that I think I would get before that palette came out would be Fête de Provence, which is the ones with the purples and the yellows and the grays, and yeah. I just think it's really pretty and unique and kind of a weird color story that I would like to get my hands on. Or the Paradise Islands, which is all these bright, fun, colorful shadows, kind of pastel-y. I think it's so beautiful. But to me, Royal Europe kicks those palettes in the ass, and this is why. So Royal Europe is set up in monochrome little sections, and I love monochrome looks. I love them. You might be able to tell by my all green look right now. And so the way that it's set up is so perfect. It also has these really beautiful pinks in it. The only color I don't really love in this is there's a dark brown color, but there's yellows underneath it. So it's okay, because as long as there's yellows with browns, I think browns are fine. And there's only one of them, so it's fine. The next brand I thought of right away was Fantasy Cosmetica. I think this brand is so cool. Their whole shtick is that they are a D&D themed makeup palette, and I love D&D, but this brand is so cool. They're so interesting. But I thought it was a really interesting question because there's no palette that I found that I'm like, I need this, or like even palettes that I'm like, ooh, that I really, really have to talk myself out of. A lot of them, while they aren't super neutral, are a little too neutral for my taste. I love really just like bam color. I love either really dark, rich pigmented color, or like really bright summery colors, or like lots of oranges and reds and yellows. So I find some of these palettes lean a little bit neutral for my personal taste, but I did think their Warlock palette was so pretty. There's purples and there's blues and there's these really pretty greens. And I also find that this palette has a lot of looks that are a lot of shades that would go well with monochrome looks, which again, love. So I love that. And I thought for a £9 palette, it was so versatile. But I will say it was a hard sell between Warlock and Sorcerer, because Sorcerer has these really pretty pinks and blues, and I just think pinks and blues are something I don't wear together, but when I see the Sorcerer palette, it makes me want to wear those colors together because they're so pretty. But because Warlock is a little more versatile because it has a few more shades in there, I just think that would be a better palette for me. But the brand's so good. The next brand I picked was Lethal Cosmetics, and this was another easy one because there is a palette at Lethal that I just think is so pretty, and I've talked myself out of many times. Also, I should say Lethal is a brand that mines mica ethically, which I think is so sick, but this was a no-brainer. I want the 1-Up palette. The pans look so beautiful, and the reason I haven't actually bought this palette is that they look really rich in the pans, but then in swatches, they look pastel as hell. And I don't really love pastels. And then there's only one color and one shimmer that go together. So you can do monotone, but you can't do like a light crease color and then a darker outer corner and then a shimmer, which is kind of my general vibe. But if I had money, if somebody was, like I said, if somebody gave me money and was like, you have to spend it at Lethal, 1UP, absolutely, I would try it out. I think I'd have a lot of fun with it. Then I thought, oh, I have to do Unearthly Cosmetics. They have such a freaking cool aesthetic to them. It's a little bit spooky, witchy, but then there's also the side of Unearthly Cosmetics that's just like really bright, really colorful, really fun. And I think the stuff they make is so cool and interesting. The one thing I'll say is trying to figure out what palette I wanted made me hate their website. Not because it's not beautiful and easy to navigate. The problem I have with Unearthly Cosmetics website is that the first picture they show is the front cover of every palette. They don't show the color story right away, and that's the thing I'm buying the palette for. Like, their artwork on their palettes is so beautiful, but I care about the inside of the palette. Show me that first, okay? Thank you. So I considered the leather and lace. That's always the one that before I realized this palette was a part of Lethal, I was like, oh, that's a pretty palette. But one of the things I don't like about it is that there's a row of neutrals. So there's, I think, a green row, a pink row, a kind of orangey neutral row, and then a very neutral row. And I just find it's a little too neutral for me. I also couldn't pick any of the palettes that were all shimmers because I just don't use all shimmer palettes. And I think a lot of their palettes are like colorful, but they have a little bit of a neutral option. So the palette I ended up deciding on was the Strawberry Milk palette because it has pinks and it has green. The two greens are both the same color palette. So they're both warm tone greens instead of one warm tone and one cool tone. And I bring this up because I just filmed a video talking about an Unearthly palette that just came out for Halloween that I'm not interested in buying because one of the greens is warm tone and one is cool toned, and so my brain's like, you can't put those together, or you can, but it's not monochrome anymore because they're not in the shade, they're not both warm tones or both cool tones. So this has both warm tone greens, it has a yellow, it has two reds, it has some pinks, and I just think I could make so many really cute looks out of it. It's, like I said, for some of the other palettes, it's really versatile for a 9-pan. I just think I would make so many pretty looks with it. The next brand is Menagerie Cosmetics, and there was a couple palettes that I was like, ooh, maybe this one, maybe that one. And it started with the first palette on their website is the Killer Purr, and I was like, ooh, that's pretty, that could be one. And then I went down to the Pause, which is a green and blue palette. I think there's some yellows in there, and I was like, ooh, those greens are so nice. Not mad at some blues, definitely not mad at some yellows. That's really nice, maybe that one, because it's a little bit smaller, it's a 9-pan. And then I scrolled down and we got to a palette I kind of forgot existed, the Indigo Ink palette. And this is another one of those palettes where when I first saw it, actually this one, I first saw it when I didn't even do makeup, so I wasn't gonna get it. And I thought it was so pretty because I consumed makeup content well before I ever started wearing makeup. And it's such a pretty palette. And then I saw it again, remembered it existed. And the first thing I did was go, ooh, if I had this palette, I would put the red and the blue together. I would put this color and this color together. I would do this and that. I came up with like 10 looks. Every time I look at this palette for this video, I come up with like 10 different looks instantly that I'm like, ooh, I want to do this, that, the other thing. It makes me so inspired to use it. And I think that's something I really appreciate a palette for. The other thing is it's discontinuing and I'm sad because I want it. And I'm probably not going to be able to get it. It's probably going to be discontinued by the time I'm going to let myself buy another palette. And I'm sad. I might get it for myself for Christmas if it lasts till Christmas, to be honest. The next brand I decided to cover is a newer brand to me, and it's Cosmic Brushes. So this, unlike pretty much every other brand, I haven't had a love affair with for a very long time. The reason why I picked it as a favorite brand is because every time I see a palette from them, every time somebody shows off their collection and that's in it or they talk about it, I just think it's so beautiful. I just think it's so beautiful. So I went into the Cosmic Brushes website, and unlike what I do most of the time, where I go through and I just kind of think about the palettes. I kind of did more of a process of elimination here. So first of all, I ruled out the Halloween collection that they have, the all purple palette, because I don't really like purples. I was like, don't want it, don't need it. Then I looked at the Serenity palette because that's one of their main ones. And I decided there were some shades in there. Some of the shades of blue and pinks were just not the kind of tones of blues and pinks that I really love. They seemed very cool toned, and I'm a warm toned kind of person, so they were just a little off to me, so I didn't love them. And then I looked at the Delights palette, and it was the same thing with the pinks, at least, that they felt very cool tone, very kind of Barbie pinks. And they're not my favorite. I prefer like a hot pink or even a light pink, but just kind of a warmer toned pink. And then I looked at the Muse palette, which is the one I ended up picking. And it felt like the murkiest palette of all of them. Some of the shades in the other palettes where I was just like, these are fine, were a little better for me. The orange was a little deeper, the pinks were a little deeper, even the ones that were more of the color of pink that I prefer. So I just thought that would be the palette, if I was to get one from this brand, that I would buy for sure. The next brand is a brand that I have loved for a really long time, and that is Melt Cosmetics. So when I thought about Melt, I always thought about really beautiful eyeshadows and really beautiful color stories, but I also thought about neutrality, because I find with Melt, it's like a lot of their palettes are like half these really grungy, deep, murky colors, and then half neutrals. And I don't really wear neutrals ever. So I loved their palettes, but usually only like half of them I loved. So like the Gemini palette and the Gemini 2, both the right side, the Gemini 1, which is the green palette, half of it's neutral. And then the Gemini 2 is these beautiful pinks, and then half of them are like really neutrally pinks. So I was always like, Melt's beautiful, but they've never made a color story that I'm just in love with. But I'm sure I could find something. I was thinking about maybe those palettes, maybe the Rust palette, maybe that all shimmer palette that exploded on most people. Didn't explode, but like was weird with most people. I had a lot of things I was thinking about. And then I went on their website, and the first palette on their palette list was Morte. That dark blue red palette. And I lusted after that palette. I feel like that's a theme on these, is I used to lust over these palettes. But that went out of stock ages ago. I didn't know it came back. So when I saw that it came back, I was like, that's the one. I did look at everything else just to make sure. But I knew in my heart that was the one. Originally, I didn't buy it because, like I said, there were some neutrals. There were some kind of bone colors. But like the dark blues and the dark blue shimmers and the red shimmers. Oh, I just think it's so beautiful. The packaging is amazing. So when I saw that was back on their website, I was like, yes, that's the one I would get. No questions. I looked, but I was like, I know in my heart that's the one I would absolutely get. So then I went to Kaleidos. And for Kaleidos, I knew that there was a palette that would be on this list if they still had it. And that would be the Angelica Nikavist palette, the collab palette that Angelica Nikavist did. It's so beautiful. I didn't buy it because there were some shades in there that I just thought I wouldn't get use out of. Mostly those kind of like sandy, peachy colors just weren't for me, and I want everything to be something I would just love in a palette before I actually buy it. But if that was still on the website, that would probably be the one I picked. Or the green Futurism palette, can't remember which one it was, but the one that was like a dark black and a bunch of murky greens would definitely be up there for getting, especially because it's a smaller palette. But since both of those weren't on, I decided to go just for the most interesting color story I thought they had. I find a lot of Kaleidos' current palettes just not up my alley. I feel like their Futurism collections were so weird and interesting, and that's what I loved about them, but they're going in a different direction now. Some of it's still beautiful, but I just find I don't like them as much as I used to. But the color story I would pick is Futurism 5 Electro Turquoise, because it's got those oranges that I love, and it's got those blues, and it's got a silver in it, and I don't have any silvers in my collection. And their silver looks so beautiful. I think I would love to use that. And I think orange and turquoise together is a really interesting color story. It's got a brown, which we talked about before, I don't love, but I think brown and turquoise is a really pretty color combination, and then brown to smoke out the outer corner of an orange look I think would also be good. So in the context of that palette, I don't actually mind the brown. So I just thought that was my favorite color story that they currently have on their collection. But once they phase that one out, I think I might not like Kaleidos anymore. At least for eyeshadow palettes. Yeah. But that's the one I would pick for sure. Okay, so the second last, we're at number 9. Brand that I decided to pick from was Glamlight. Glamlight is such an interesting brand. They're really colorful. They're really fun. I've heard a lot of good things, especially about their shimmers. Not so much about the mattes. So I don't know if the mattes are just like not as good or if they're just not good at all. I don't know. But they do a lot of fun color stories that I'm really intrigued by. They do a lot of like rainbow palettes, especially in their early years. And as the brand's gone on, they've kind of gone away from these kind of weird bulky packaging to cute packaging, but still food themed, but slimmer, more sleek, more easily fittable places, which I do really appreciate. And for me, there's a lot of palettes that I've seen that I'm like, ooh, that's pretty. One of the ones that I was seriously considering, I was even considering buying at one point, was their, oh God, what was it? It was when they did those like martini collections. There was like the wine, the alcohol collection. They did the wine palette, which was all purple, and they did a neutral one, and they did like an all green one, and then they did one that was like a cocktail theme, and it was so summery and beautiful, and I thought about that. But I think I knew in my heart of hearts that if somebody said, I will give you a free palette from Glamlight, the one I would pick was Ice Cream Dream. It's so pretty. This is such an impractical palette for me because I don't even know if I like these kind of shades. If you don't know, Ice Cream Dream is a pastel palette, and I've never tried pastels. I'm not sure I would like pastels. I feel like I'm either gonna love pastels or I'm gonna hate pastels. But Ice Cream Dream is just so pretty. There's so many pretty shimmers. There's so many bright, fun, colorful shadows. And I feel like it's a pastel palette that's still really, really bright. So it's pastel, but not in the fact, they're not muted pastels. They're like bright, balmy, colorful pastels. And I think I would just have so much fun with this palette. But it's impractical, so I'm never going to buy it. But if somebody was like, do you want a palette from Glamlight? Which one? I'd be like, Ice Cream Dream, please. Please, Ice Cream Dream. I want it. I want to try it. I want to try it so bad. And I tried to pretend that that's not the one I wanted. Because I was like, that's not practical, but that's the one I want. It is. Let's be honest. That's the one. That's the one. So the last brand I decided to pick from was BH Cosmetics. I feel like they've kind of fallen off since they were bought by, I don't even know what brand, but they were bought out. And they haven't really come out with anything. I don't know if they've actually come out with anything at all, but nothing exciting for sure. But they still have all their old stuff going on. And BH is an interesting brand to me. I think they're a really interesting brand. There's a lot of things they've come out with that I'm like, ooh, that's nice. They're really bright. They're really colorful. They're really fun. But they do seem to kind of bounce between really fun and colorful but for neutral people. And so there's a couple palettes that I'm like, ooh, those are pretty, like the avocado toast palette, the mimosa palette, and the blueberry muffin palette. But all of those palettes feel a little bit like not something I would love because they feel like, well, they may not be neutral palettes, especially the mimosa palette. They feel kind of samey, like they could have been made with slightly less pans. And then there's that, I can't remember what it's called, but it's this huge palette. It has a million beautiful colors in it, but it's so big. And so the only thing I was left with when I took out all the neutral or the palettes with a lot of neutrals in them or that huge ass palette was Trendy in Tokyo. And honestly, I would not be mad at Trendy in Tokyo. It's a rainbow palette, but there's some purples in there, and they're like these cool tone purples, which I really love. I think they're cool tone purples, maybe not. But they're shades of purple that I think I would really like. I don't have a lot of purple. But it's a nice little rainbow palette. It's not huge. It's just a little guy. I think it's 4, 8, 12, 16. I think it's a 16 pan. So I think it's a good size for a rainbow palette. And I think that's the one I would get. In fact, actually, I have a list of palettes I'm going to buy. And that was on it for a really long time. It eventually got replaced by something else. But it was on my list for a long time to actually buy. So I'm not surprised that ended up being the palette I picked. Anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed that video. Let me know if you want me to do another one of these. I actually have a lot of ideas of ones I could do with different kind of types of brands. I was thinking about doing one where it was like all kind of neutral glam palettes, one where it was like brands that I don't support, but what would I buy if I had to, palettes, things like that. I might make them shorter TikTok videos. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. You can, if you enjoyed this video, leave a thumbs up, subscribe if you like some of the other content I do. You can go on my page and see what else I've posted. You can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitch, all at Stone Says Hello, and I will see you guys later. Bye!